In this lecture, we will discuss repetition structures in Visual Basic. The first repetition structure we will talk about is called the do-while loop. Let's start with an example of repaying a loan. Let's suppose we borrow $15,000, and let's say that the annual interest rate is 6.5%. So we'll say that the first month we'll pay $250. The question we want to ask now is, what is the new balance, or how much do we owe after paying the $250? The answer isn't just taking the $250 and subtracting it from the $15,000. We have to factor in this interest rate. Now, because it's an annual interest rate, we have to figure out how much interest is being charged every month. So we have to convert it to a monthly interest rate. Well, the way we do that is just we divide it by 12 months in a year. So in this case, we can convert the percentage to a decimal by taking 6.5 and divide it by 100. So that would be 0.065, and then we divide it by 12. So that number is the monthly interest rate. So let's figure out what the interest is going to be for that first month. We find that if we take that interest rate and multiply it by 15,000, we would see that the interest for the first month is going to be $81.25. So now we have to add this on top of the 15,000, then we can subtract the 250. So what that means is our remaining balance is 15,000 plus 81.25 minus 250, and we would see that we would owe $14,831.25. So let's say we pay another $250 for the second month. What would be the remaining balance then? And then what about the next month? Or maybe even the month after that, and so forth. You see where I'm going with this? What we find is that there are a lot of situations where we need to be able to repeat calculations. Paying back a loan and figuring out the remaining balance is one such example. So the question is for our programs is, how do we write these programs to handle repetitive instructions? And fortunately, we do have repetition structures available to us that we can use to do something like this, where we can repeat some instructions over and over again. One structure we have is what's called the do-while loop. And this is pretty much just like any while loop from other programming languages, if you are familiar with how while loops work in general. So let me give you the format for it, or the syntax of how we use it in Visual Basic. So it looks something like this, where the first line we have the keywords do and while. This is true for any do-while loop. And then we have our condition, which is going to be either true or false. We have a set of statements inside the body of our loop. And then we end the loop by using the word loop. Remember, we don't have curly braces, so we have to use the word loop to indicate that we are done with the do-while loop. The way this works is pretty simple. As long as the condition is true, we're going to execute the set of statements inside the body of our loop. So we run the statements, and then we go back to our condition. If it's true, we'll run the statements again. We go back to our condition, and we keep repeating this as long as the condition is true. Now, if or once the condition is false, we exit the loop. The reason why I say if or once is the condition could be initially false. And if that happens, we just don't execute any of the statements in the body at all. But what we could do is the condition may be initially true, and then eventually something within the statements makes the condition false. So whenever that happens, we stop repeating the instructions in the loop, and we just exit the loop and move on with the rest of our program. Here's an example of some code where we use a do-while loop. So here we have a variable called counter. It's an integer that's initially 1. Now if we look at our do-while loop, we're checking that as long as counter is less than or equal to 3, we're going to display a message box that shows the value of counter. And then we have counter plus equals 1. I don't think we talked about this in this class, but in other languages, this plus equals right here means that we're going to take the value of counter, we're going to increase it by 1, and then store it back in the counter. So that's all we're doing. We're basically incrementing the value of counter by 1. So let's walk through this code and just see what's going to happen here. So I'm going to put counter down here. There we go. And initially, it's 1. So we go into our condition of our loop. So we first check, is counter less than or equal to 3? Well, counter is 1, and 1 is less than or equal to 3, so that's true. So we're going to display the message box. So we're going to display a 1, and then we're going to increase counter by 1 and store it back into counter. So now we're going to change this, and it's going to become 2. So we go back into the while loop condition, and we're going to check, is 2 less than or equal to 3? This is true. So we're going to go back into the body of our loop. We're going to display 2 in our message box. We're going to increment counter by 1. So now counter becomes 3. So we go back to our condition. 3 less than or equal to 3 is true. So we go back into our loop again. We're going to display 3 in a message box. We're going to increment our counter by 1. So now our counter becomes 4. So we go back to our condition. 4 is not less than or equal to 3. That's false. So we skip the rest of the body of the loop and we just exit the loop. Here's a flow chart to help illustrate the process that we just did with our code. So we have our counter, which is 1 up here at the top, right here. And we're going to go down to our condition and ask, is our counter less than or equal to 3? Initially, that's true. So we're going to head over here and print the counter, and then we're going to go increment our counter by 1, and then go back and ask again, is the value of counter less than or equal to 3? So notice that we're actually going to repeat this 3 times. So we go into this loop when 1 is less than or equal to 3, when 2 is less than or equal to 3, and 3 is less than or equal to 3. So we repeat this loop 3 times. And once we do the 3rd time, our counter is going to become 4. 4 is not less than or equal to 3, so that's false. So we're just going to go over here to this no section and do whatever comes afterwards in our program. But this is just to show that we're going to repeat our instruction several times.